Today, we're going to talk about something that you've probably heard, or a terminology that you've heard over the last couple of years, and that's climate change. And you're probably wondering, are we seriously going to talk about climate change and everything that contributes to it? No, but I'm here talking to you investors on why you guys should invest your money into renewables in the next coming years, especially with the shift in energy that's coming up in the next couple of decades, rather than investing your money in fossil fuels, fracking, or oil. Fracking and oil extraction create immediate environmental impacts: animal harm, polluted air, contaminated water, and the destruction of ecosystems, and much more. Communities near these operations bear the biggest burden in the production of fossil fuels, higher risk of respiratory diseases, groundwater contamination, earthquakes, and economic loss. Unfortunately, most of the heavily affected communities can't fight back against fracking and oil extraction. Relocate to a safer, cleaner area due to lack of resources to stop fossil fuel production. Environmental harm falls on numerous vulnerable communities while profits are enjoyed by few. This is where environmental justice becomes a central issue. Structural justice is about ensuring that everyone from every community, regardless of background, socioeconomic status, religion, race, gender, or position, has access to a healthy environment. This is the ideal situation, but as we can see in our world, this is not the case. On the other hand, we see low-income and marginalized communities suffering more from fracking and oil drilling because of their proximity to these operations and lack of resources. Renewable energy also decreases the harmful emissions released, as there are no byproducts from solar and wind energy production, only limited emissions when manufactured. According to the World Resources Institute, renewable energy sources typically emit about 50 grams or less of CO2 emissions per kilowatt over their lifetime, compared to about 1,000 grams CO2 kilowatt for coal and 475 grams of CO2 per kilowatt for natural gas. Since renewable energy emits 5% of CO2 compared to natural gas, it becomes a much more environmentally responsible investment. Due to decreased CO2 emissions, respiratory illnesses are less likely, such as asthma, tuberculosis, and lung cancer. In a report by the Department of Energy, they said that renewable energy can reduce the incidence and symptoms of heart and respiratory conditions, allergies, and more. They also provide physical comfort, which supports mental health and well-being. Investors, if you're still not convinced to invest in renewable energy and you're still thinking about investing in non-renewable energy, we're going to show you 2 interviews we conducted with top executives in solar and wind energy companies, and let them talk to you about the business opportunities and the opportunities to come in the next couple years in renewable energy, and why you should invest in renewable energy instead of non-renewable energy.
I think what we can generally say is that climate change will change how oil assets, how renewables assets perform. And by investing to renewables, you have an impact on how much climate change will there be. And you also have the ability to cite where the impact will be less. While with oil and gas assets, you have a much more complex situation.
One thing that I feel is important, Lorenzo, that is happening, and we've seen it a lot, is the appetite for lenders to finance renewable projects compared to oil and gas. Access to capital is becoming more and more difficult for oil and gas. There's much more opportunities in renewables. Policy is another important element, because when you're making an investment, what you want: access to capital, you want loan stable regulation, and you want the ability to predict how long you can keep those assets. So as climate change and the understanding of climate change is evolving, particularly more and more in developed countries, this is becoming a fundamental shift.
You are driving more climate change, more disruption, large weather events, and so on, that are not good for you mentally, and also not good generally for asset returns.
The price of generating renewable energy compared to what it was, and you see where the price of renewable was 10 years ago. Wind and solar are the cheapest source of energy. And that is just fundamentals. This is not about climate change or no, just fundamentally speaking, business-wise. We're making projections on how they thought the future of renewables will be. And what you see is a consistent increase to the projections. And it's going more and more and more and more. What is fascinating of all this, because it's energy and it's infrastructure and it's the size of the industry, is that after $6.6 trillion spent on renewables and $3.5 trillion spent in networks, electricity networks since 2005, in the last 20 years, global energy is still 80% or so reliant on fossil fuels. So the opportunity for the energy transition is just huge. You can see here how fossil fuels are the share of primary energy since 1965. And with all these investments, still, because we also need to consider also that the world keeps growing and the energy consumption and the amount of energy we need as humanity in general, we need more of this. This is kind of some of the projects we're doing in Japan, in Chile, in the middle of the desert, many other projects in Spain, in France, and in Italy. This is, for example, a NATO Air Force base. You see here the runway was transformed into a solar farm. It was a land that is highly contaminated. There was no other use. This plant here powers 50,000 homes.
There is a general understanding that the climate change is real. There's an understanding that energy transition needs to happen if you want to impact that, if you want to limit climate change and the effects on Earth. And therefore, our expectation is that in the long run, regulation, carbon pricing, taxation, investments into grid will favor renewable rather than conventional energy sources. Similar in efficiency, so what you saw before, the cost curve. So costs going down, that is a lot of innovation. That's an innovation in manufacturing process, higher efficiency, so getting more energy out of the same size of solar panel, more reliable production manufacturing techniques, and that then adding to that other technologies to provide more reliable electricity. We're partnering very effectively with our suppliers to provide that, give them certainty on how much we're going to buy, the ability to invest into more efficient manufacturing, and then for us to get preferred access to solar panels. That's just the biggest thing I think that you see when you think about a solar plant.
Solar, for example, in the last 15 years, the prices have gone down more than 95%. So at some point, this is just competing with market forces. It's not anymore depending on subsidies or only policy. Every industry just need policy for having rules of the game for the long term. One important and last element that we put a lot of effort in is partnership with the communities and making sure that those communities are integrated into these fields, whatever they have around. We have over 600 plants, and you have 600 communities that they have different needs and different activities and different things that they produce and what they're interested on. You need to partner with them, because at the end of the day, you're providing electricity to them, but also you're part of their landscape.
We each have a role to play in this transition, as investors, as business leaders, and as advocates for change. It's time that we start investing in renewable energy rather than non-renewable energy and pave the way for a brighter future, a cleaner future, and make good business deals.